our special guest of the week, Mr. Dan Fylstra from Frontline Systems and Solver.com. As Jordan served up to begin with, not often we ever talk to somebody who has their own Wikipedia page. I tried to start a Wikipedia page one time, and they took it right down. So welcome, Dan. Welcome to the show. I understand that you might have something to do with a little program called VisiCalc. Would you mind telling us what that is?
Oh, sure. Actually, there's probably a lot of listeners who don't know what it is because it's been so long. You know, I think I know the answer to this question 30 years ago because I've been around that long, and I think one of the very first dates I ever went on with my fiancée, who became my spouse, was to that movie. But I won't say anything because we want to give people, you know, a chance to guess it. But so, yeah, and so VisiCalc is actually at least that old. It was, see, it was we started working on it in 1978. So there was an interesting story. There were really three people involved. Dan Bricklin, who really had the idea for the electronic spreadsheet, and this was in an era when personal computers were just arriving on the scene, but most people were using minis and mainframes. And then Bob Frankston, who was the friend of Dan's, who was the guy who wrote all the code of the original VisiCalc on the Apple II. And then I was the third player, really in a marketing role. I brought it to Steve Jobs and to Mike Markkula at Apple and went around demoing it to all the Apple's regional distributors and dealers and so on. And I kind of played a product management role, too, about what features we had to have in the first version. And I helped finance it. And there was actually, you have to realize this was a real early startup situation, so the VisiCalc, the first version, was developed on one Apple II that I managed to buy directly from Steve Jobs at a negotiated price, and then loan to Bricklin and Frankston. Never got that one back. It's in a museum somewhere now or something. But so VisiCalc was developed at a time. Dan actually, I mean, there's a story behind this too. Dan Bricklin, all three of us were MIT Course 6.3 graduates. It's the MIT Computer Science program. And Dan and I were both in Harvard Business School 1 year apart. I was, I guess I had just graduated and he was finishing up. So he had, we both had the same professor for finance in the first year, Charles Kelso. And Dan actually had the idea for the electronic spreadsheet, sitting in a classroom, watching the professor going back and forth on a blackboard. It's a chalkboard. I don't know if some people may not know what that is. Right. But it's with, you know, it's something you write on and you erase. And so there was a financial projection up on the chalkboard, and Professor Kelso was erasing and rewriting and erasing and rewriting and playing what if, essentially. And Dan, who had worked on full-screen word processors at Digital Equipment Corporation, that's a mini computer maker, by the way. They're no longer around. But he got the idea that you could do the same sort of thing you do with a full-screen word processor, but for numbers. So anyway, Dan, this is a true story, Dan actually went to talk to Professor Kelso about this and wanted to get an assessment of the business idea. And Kelso was an expert. He knew what companies, large companies, Fortune 500 companies were doing. They were all doing financial modeling and projections, but they were doing it on time sharing, using systems like FinPlan and SimPlan, and these are tools that they would use actually through like a teletype terminal with a command language. So, being a Harvard Business School professor, I guess understanding the market pretty well, he really told Dan Bricklin that there wasn't too much potential for the spreadsheet because the market was already well served by these time-sharing solutions. But he said he had this student named Dan Fylstra the previous year who had actually gone off and started a company, so we were starting to do software publishing for personal computers, and maybe he should talk to me. So Dan Bricklin called me up and came over and we talked, and VisiCalc was like a gleam in the eye. It didn't have a name at this point. It was a gleam in Dan's eye. And actually, I did think it was a good idea. Yeah. I thought it was a very strong idea, and so that's when I loaned him the first Apple II, and he began experimenting with it. And it kind of went from there into a pretty serious project, and then it took about took the greater part of a year to build a real commercial version. The code was actually written on a Prime mini computer because you couldn't actually develop something like this on Apple II. The Apple II was so slow and so primitive in terms of its processor speed that Frankston had to deal with the fact that the human operator could get ahead of the calculations just by typing, and so he was buffering keystrokes and so on. Anyway, so VisiCalc came out in a way that was very synergistic with the Apple II and what Apple Computer was doing and what Computerland was doing, because at this time computer stores were very new. They were just coming into being, and Computerland was a franchise organization. It was opening stores or helping independent operators, open stores around the country, and so we all kind of helped each other. And one, it really led to a situation where VisiCalc helped sell the Apple II, but the Apple II also helped sell VisiCalc, really made it feasible. And Computerland were the people doing the selling. So now that was a long time ago, kind of in a galaxy far, far away, and things have changed quite a bit. VisiCalc kind of was ultimately superseded on the IBM PC by Lotus 123, and ultimately Lotus 123 was superseded by Excel, first on the Mac and then on Windows. And this probably isn't over yet.
Wow.
Now, actually, a lot of our attention is on Excel Online and Google Sheets.
Yeah. I'm curious. I remember those days when you talk about, that time long ago. I remember taking out a bank loan to buy a computer, and bringing it home on a like a dolly thing. When I was in the Navy, and I brought it back to the barracks on this dolly thing, and all these big boxes stacked up that I had to then put together. But I'm curious to know when that professor didn't think this unnamed VisiCalc was a good idea. What did you see as it being a good idea?
Well, it's interesting. I just had a sense of the market. So at that point, I had a company called Personal Software. Later, that company got renamed VisiCorp because VisiCalc became such a prominent product, and we had other we had VisiPlot and VisiWord and other things too. But I was in touch with the market because at the beginning we were selling first some relatively straightforward tools. And our best-selling product was actually a chess-playing program called Microchess by Peter Jennings, who was really my very early partner in Personal Software. And we were in touch with a lot of people in computer stores, and people were thinking personal computers, home computers. That was the notion. But when you actually talk to people about who was buying these things, it was business people. Mm-hmm. It was people buying it for a business purpose. And at least I had the insight, fortunately, to recognize that this idea of a full-screen tool like a word processor, but for numbers, would really work. That that people would be able to use it. Yeah. We had a lot of interesting talks, the three of us, at this time. Most of them were in Bob Frankston's attic in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we debated things. So, because we all were computer science graduates and we had a sense about software design, there were a lot of things that came out in the initial VisiCalc that were deliberate. They were not just lucky or accidental. For example, A1 notation was something that came out in the very first Apple II VisiCalc, but we had considered several alternatives, including R1C1, what Microsoft later tried to do with R1C1 notation, and the ability, there was actually a prototype of VisiCalc where you could type into the column headers and the row headers and type in your labels, which would have been interesting if we had done that. But and I would credit Dan with this, that what we were really doing was defining a namespace, a way for people to have a familiar way to address where the formulas were and where the results appeared, and a stable namespace turned out to be a good idea. Turned out to be an important idea. And there are a whole lot of other things. I mean, in many ways, it's striking how similar today's spreadsheets are to the original Apple II VisiCalc. You know, I mean, there's graphics. It's a graphical tool, and it's much better now. And there's much richer database facilities. That really started with Lotus 123 and got a lot richer with Excel, and then a whole lot richer with Power Pivot and Power Query that we have today. But a lot of the ideas, you know, are still what we had back then.
Wow.
Wow.
So how does it feel that we're like your three of your millions of sons?
I'll tell you, there is a downside to having a Wikipedia page and to having like thousands and thousands of references over the web. I mean, I will tell people, you know, yeah, you can find out a lot about me on the web, and some of it is true.
Some of it.
And a lot of it isn't, you know, so... I think there's also a Facebook page. I've never joined Facebook. I'm almost like under protest on Facebook. But apparently there's a Facebook page that they created about me that I can't change. You know, I have no role in creating it or changing it.
Wow.
So, yeah, there's an upside and downside.
Gotcha.
So what were the faces like when you first showed this to? I mean, I assume when you guys created this project, were you thinking this is going to be big in finance, this is going to be big in engineering? Did you think that it was going to have a narrow band or that it was going to have a broad band? And also, what were in the sessions? What were the model where you have to do it all over here? Look, you could just do this and it will update in 1 second. You can run tons of different scenarios now, quickly.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting because we literally, I can remember us in over a period of months, really, talking this over, and we would wax and wane in our own enthusiasm. We would literally go from, you know, everyone can use this. You know, if you have a huge market, you know, the kind of thing you should never really say in a startup because it's usually unrealistic. But we were, you know, we would go in periods of enthusiasm. We would say, you know, everyone can use this. I mean, small businesses, large businesses, finance can use it, HR can use it, people can use it for their checkbooks, you know, and so on. And then we would, at other times, we'd be really pessimistic and say, you know, it's too abstract. People won't get it. You know, people have to build their own models. They won't be able to. You know, it's not actually super good for any one thing. It won't have any market at all. You know, we'll never get anywhere. And so we just had the faith that you have to have when you're entrepreneurs to get it going. I will tell you that the first time I showed VisiCalc to the people at Apple, I remember sitting in a room with Mike Markkula, who was the first president of Apple Computer. I think Steve Jobs was either in that same session or not. And I showed them an example in VisiCalc that Bob Frankston had done, I think, of a checkbook balancing program. And Mike Markkula's first reaction was, "Oh, that's nice. It's a checkbook balancing program." You know, that's all they thought it was, and they thought that was nice. But you know, I think they also had another checkbook balancing program in AppleSoft Basic or something.
Wow.
But you know, they did get it. I mean, eventually they realized that it was really multi-purpose and you could do a lot. I will tell you that by the time we were off giving demos to Apple's dealers, which we would do, I would go out to the regional Apple distributor meetings, and there we might have even 100 or even more, maybe 200 dealers in attendance. And at that time, by the way, projection TV screens were very rare. But these guys, these distributors, had one, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to demo VisiCalc on a big screen, and we would demo it to oohs and ahs. I mean, it was like, you know, just putting something up and then playing what if and changing the numbers. And it was so slow at that time that you would actually see this ripple effect where the numbers would slowly change across the screen. But it all seemed very fast, and people were amazed. And so we knew, and the Apple people too, knew we were on the right track when we were getting that kind of reaction.
You know, so it's interesting to me because after the past BAC conference a couple weeks ago, you know, I was really sensing a need for empowerment. You know, the people who don't get data, the people who don't understand SQL, and never will, because their job is you know, call center supervisor. You know, how can you empower them around data? And
Yeah.
that's what I'm hearing from you is, was the other person might have been in a world of the professionals, and the professionals got it. But what about the people who do need to be empowered? And you know, my friend Leslie, who was running a Girl Scout troop and managing merit badges. But that seems like what you are allowed to have happen, you know, to where she could get off of index cards and trying to remember.
Yeah, but you know, it actually goes up and down the company size. That is, there are lots of business analysts typically in large companies and in middle-sized companies and in smaller companies who all were kind of empowered by the spreadsheet. And I've heard that one of the most rewarding things really about having been in my position is I will run into people all the time who will, you know, who will realize the role that I played, and then they'll say, you know, that changed my life, or that changed my career for the better, fortunately. Mm-hmm. And you know, because I was, you know, recognized as being able to do something in my company and got promoted, and then I went off and started my own company, and I became, you know, I was a successful consultant, and there are a lot of stories like this of people even making career changes because they discovered what they could do.
And I'll bet you that there's somebody saying it sucked for them. Because like I'm talking with a divorce attorney and how they need to bring all this data about the other side to see if the other side has money or not, that anything they're hiding. So now you can bring all that stuff together and you say, oh, God. No, it should have been months before they found that money I was hiding.
Damn, you did, Fylstra.
Pool table. Oh.
No, wait, that's not me. That's the NSA. Actually, that is technology, and kind of another topic of privacy and, you know, ubiquitous means, whether it's over the internet like this or, you know, cameras everywhere. I mean, a lot of people say, I'm not really the expert on this, but a lot of people say privacy has gone away, you know, get used to it. You know, chill out, and that's unfortunately probably true.
Well, because I wonder about some things, particularly about, you know, my first experience with Windows 8.1 was just a few weeks ago, and to log into 8.1, I've got to log into Windows. It just feels like, why don't I just cut the front of my house open and let people see me sitting on the toilet and eating and talking on the phone with my mother? You know, let's just go ahead and get it over with.
I hear you. I mean, talk to Microsoft about that. I mean, they want to know your identity for lots of reasons. There are advantages too. You know, that,
sure.
Doing what we're doing now would be hard if we didn't, you know, have a easy way to know your identity, you know, on Google Plus and Google Hangouts here.
Sure.
But I would say one other thing, you know, about that. So one thing that's happening for us is that we have these analytics tools, and for a long time that's been kind of an interesting niche, but now it's getting to be a very exciting time because there's so much data, and whether it's big data or, you know, or just streams and streams of ordinary sized data, the availability of that data is causing people to get more and more interested in analytics. But I also think that, you know, the big boys, if you will, or the big players, have had the computing power and expertise to take advantage of data for a fairly long time. What's changing is that, you know, whether it's companies at levels within the company where you're doing work within a department or group, or all the way down to the individual business analyst, it's now becoming possible for those people to kind of do the same thing on an equal footing with the big boys. In other words, everyone is going to be empowered to be able to analyze a lot of data. You can do powerful data mining in Excel. You can do the kinds of things. So you don't have to be able to program in R or Python, and you don't have to be a data scientist or a PhD, and you don't actually have to. I mean, there are a bunch of good new Masters in Analytics programs for somebody who's got the 1 or 2 years and the money to take one of those programs. I'm all for it. But if you don't have that time and you've got to get results now or get results this month or next month, you can. I mean, it is possible, and Excel is an amazingly good tool for doing that.
Yes, it
I think
is.
that parlays pretty nicely, actually, to our topic of the week. So I'm going to pass this over to you, Jordan, because I'm interested in you expanding upon that. So